My name is Mark Myman from Freedom Mortgage. I would like to invite my co-host, Mark Salerno, to introduce himself in just a moment here, but just procedurally to give you guys a little insight, we would love to hear where people are dialing in from. I do see some people have already posted, some familiar faces. And we'd love to hear if there's anything specific that you want to learn from either today's session or from the series in general. We really want to tailor this to make it, helpful for you. So if there's anything specific that you don't see that we've covered so far that you want us to cover, by all means, let us know. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please post them in the chat function. We'll definitely make sure we get to them at the end in the Q&A session or potentially live, depending on how things are going. We would love for you to invite your clients to participate in this. We have done a couple of sessions already for clients, but we do have links to all of the recorded sessions so far. So there's no time that's too late for them to register. So if you have clients who you can think of, I'm sure, you wouldn't be on this call if that weren't the case. But if you have clients who are interested in investing in real estate or just want to explore it, as you know, this is a free thing that we're doing for people just to get education out there. So please share this with them. The client version of this series is on Tuesdays at 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific. So they can register at thebridgeloanguide.com. And for those of you dialing in from the Financial Planning Association today, first of all, thank you to them for helping us promote this event and for helping us set up the CE credits. So for those of you who are joining from that group, we will provide a URL and a unique code at the end of this session, the very last slide, so that you can log in and claim your credits. So that will be provided today at the end. And for those of you who are not already following us on Instagram, if you are on Instagram, we would love for you to check us out there. We post a lot about these types of events and different tidbits and information that can be helpful for you and your clients. So please follow us there if you're not already. So it is my pleasure to kind of tell you more about the sessions that are coming up. As you know, we're doing these Wednesdays at 1 Eastern. Our next session after this week will be with an attorney talking about all the different legal aspects of real estate, whether it makes sense to hold a property in an LLC or not, what the benefits and drawbacks are to that, talking about financing contingencies, when it might be okay to waive them or how risky that may be and how to mitigate that. We'll talk to both title and property and casualty insurance agents the following week about how to properly insure the investment to make sure that you're not putting yourself at risk. We'll also talk to an accountant the following week after that, where we'll talk about all the tax benefits of real estate. And that's where I think one of the areas where real estate is really beneficial. The tax code is very favorable to people who own real estate. So we want to help you guys take advantage of that for your clients. And lastly, we'll end with a session about 1031 exchanges, which I see my good friend Eric is actually an attendee today. He'll be co-hosting that event with me about 4 weeks in, and that's going to be another great session where we're going to talk about how to potentially defer your capital gains once you are ready to sell your first investment property and move up into another. So that's what we have coming up. Again, if you feel like it would be helpful for any of your clients to join us, Tuesdays at 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific is when we're doing the client version. We're only about 1 or 2 sessions in so far. And again, the recorded versions are available. You can check it out at thebridgeloanguide.com, or you can email us at mmteam@freedommortgage.com, and we can send you a web page that has all of the links to the recorded versions, as well as the links to Zoom for any upcoming sessions. We know some people have a little bit of difficulty with some of the Zoom reminder emails. So that would be one way to get that information. If you want that information, please email us and we'll make sure you get it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my friend Mark Salerno from Wealth Edge. Mark, if you don't mind turning on your screen so we can see you.
Whoa.
There you are.
Hey.
Hello. Pleasure to see you again.
Nice to see you, Mark.
So Yeah, thank you for joining us. So Mark, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your firm and what you do and how you help clients, and then we'll dive into more real estate specific things in just a
Oh,
minute.
great. Well, let me start off by saying we're a New York City-based firm. We're on Park Avenue and 40th Street. Primarily, we're involved in what I would refer to as business management and personal financial planning. How do we do that? We do that through a strong foundation in tax planning and accounting. We have a relatively large team of CPAs and accountants here, so we're not only helping our business clients manage their books and doing their quarterly reconciliations and payrolls, but we're giving them advice on planning. That does bleed through to the personal side. So we're doing fee-based planning for our clients, and we have a team, a wealth management team here that does that because I know we're speaking to a lot of CFPs. We're on the eMoney platform, and that's proved to be very, very helpful for us in servicing our clients and keeping on top of all the different activities and points of contact that we have with them throughout the year. So in addition to the tax planning and accounting and financial planning, we have an investment advisory team, both where we're advising as well as doing investments on behalf of clients. So we have a CFA running that group for us. And in addition, we really put a lot of focus on professional relationship management. So Mark, you're an example of one of our professional relationships, particularly along the sides of mortgage and mortgage refinancing. You know, you and your team have been very helpful to us and to our clients in particular. You know, this week we're closing or have closed or will be closing over $3 million worth of mortgages. So for that, we do appreciate it. And I can't stress that enough to the practitioners that are out there participating in this call, the importance of having these professional relationships, whether it be with mortgage brokers, real estate agents, trust and estate attorneys, business attorneys, bankers, not just of the mortgage variety, but from a lending standpoint. So these are all important parts of our business management and wealth management services.
Yeah, well, that's great. Why don't we touch on that a little bit more? Because one of the things that we've talked about in prior sessions with real estate agents, and it was a little bit different angle, but I think it's relevant here, is building your team. So real estate isn't done with just, by yourself, right? Or at least it shouldn't be if you're getting proper advice. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have the whole series with all these different professionals that represent different aspects of it. But, and I think it's relevant to what you just said, even though you're talking about more of a financial team, but there are aspects of this where, for example, an estate attorney might want to weigh in on what you're doing with your investment real estate, because it might be something that you pass down to future generations. So maybe you can talk just a little bit about, because you've talked about the importance of it, but for you in particular and your firm, how have you built those relationships over time? Because I think that's something that people can probably do, more of.
Sure. Well, just as an example, you and your team, we met you at one of the CFP presentations. I think it was the spring of 2018 when we did our annual meeting. You were there as one of the vendors, and we had started talking with you and wanted to give you a shot at some of the business that we do refer out. There's so many people involved in this business. I want to put their hand in other people's pockets. I'm just happy to get good quality work done and open communication. I understand the complexities of these things. All of our clients, and I'm speaking generally for the CFP community, all of our clients think that things happen with a stroke of a button on your computer, but that's not the case. There's a lot of hiccups along the way. Like from a communication standpoint, we want to get back to our clients, within 24 hours. On whether it's a voicemail or an email. And sometimes that's just to acknowledge the fact that we got it and it's going to take us a little while to get back to them. But we find it very important with the professionals that we work with that they keep these lines of communication open. Sometimes even if there's nothing to report, I just want to hear that there's nothing to report. It's just status quo and it's going to take us a little longer to get an answer. At least then I can have an open dialogue with the client to say, hey, they're working on it. They know, they haven't forgotten about us. So we're looking through our professional relationships or organizations like the CFP board. We attend the AICPA conference as well, and we've made some relationships there. But really, we find that when we're working with clients, we prefer to work with their advisors that they already have. So that's how we've picked up relationships as well, because people are either going to be responsive, and that's what we're looking for, or not. So if they can be responsive and do professional work, we're looking to add them to our pool of professional contacts. What I found over the years is, I'm approaching my 60s. Most of my clients are give or take 10 years, but I do have older clients, and a lot of times they want to do things face to face with people. So geographic location becomes important, understanding how they want to get things done. You may recall the client down in Florida who only wanted to be dealt with didn't want to do any e-signatures, wanted you to send him everything, wanted it to be highlighted where he needed to sign, and he would call with questions. When you try to send him anything by email, just assume that he never gets it. So it's these type of things, in working with other professionals, that by understanding the client and helping the other professional understand how they like to be communicated with and what's going to work, that's what we find best.
Perfect. Yeah, I've had a similar experience where you try and sometimes you fail with certain referral partners, and over time you learn and you really build like a solid network over time. So I've had a similar experience to you. So thanks for sharing. And it's sort of apropos that you and I met through the Financial Planning Association, and they've been great at helping us promote this event. I know a good amount of the attendees are here because of that group, and just want to mention them because I do appreciate them providing this platform and helping us promote it. So, so one thing I want to definitely cover is, we find that a lot of people who buy real estate, especially for people who are maybe buying initially as a primary residence, but then even as investors, what we see often is that people will, especially like young couples in particular, they will save and save and save as they're getting started in their careers, and then they'll buy a home and they'll have nothing else to show for it as far as like retirement funds or other investments. And I think what I would love to hear from you is, just generally speaking, what financial aspects do you recommend that people have in order before they look at buying real estate? Because we want to make sure that people understand real estate is one type of investment. It's not the only one. But yeah, what other aspects would you recommend somebody would have in order?
Whether we're involved in an actual financial planning engagement with someone, or they're just coming to us with that question, it really does start with the basics, right? If you're going to make an illiquid investment that you're going to hold on to for many, many years, you better have the foundation in place. And what comprises a good foundation for someone? Having an emergency fund. I think the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of having capital, and whether that's an individual or whether that's a business. So often our business owners are coming to us, focused on the P&L, the profit and loss statement, as opposed to focus on the balance sheet. Well, when you go through an environment that we've all gone through over this last 14 months, look what's happened to many businesses, retail businesses, restaurants, their cash flow, right? Where are they going to get the money to meet their expenses when revenue is down? The same could be said for an investor in real estate that's starting out and doesn't have a lot of liquidity. So before I would be recommending an investment in real estate, I'd want to see the client have sufficient reserves, not only for their personal needs. And again, every practitioner might treat this a little bit differently, Mark, but whether that's 3 months, 6 months, many of our clients, we have over a year's worth of cash available to them. We understand that there is an opportunity cost associated with that, but there's also the advantage of being able to sleep at night and not worrying about point in time risk of where they're going to get their cash flow for the next year if they are a retiree. Perhaps we can hold less if that individual is employed and making a good income and earning. So it's having adequate emergency funds in place, both from a business and a personal standpoint. Why would you buy real estate if you don't have a will in place, right? So let's do the basics. Let's get a will in place, a healthcare proxy, a power of attorney, a living will. And again, if the client doesn't want to do it, that's fine. But to not try to address that prior to making a long-term investment in real estate doesn't make sense. The same could be said for life or disability. I'll focus on the disability insurance first. You're a young investor, right? What do you do in an environment like this if all of a sudden your tenant's out of work? He owned a restaurant. The restaurant's not making money. He was paying you rent. He or she was paying you rent. And now they say, hey, I've been a good tenant, but I just can't afford to pay you. Well, then you better make sure you have the reserves. Let's presume you have the reserves or you have the savings because of your employment that you can pile more money back in to support that mortgage, the maintenance, any upkeep that might be required on the real estate. But now you lose your job and you've eaten through your personal reserves, and now you're eating through the reserves and emergency fund that you have for the investment real estate. Well, if you're disabled, that might cover you for the first 6 months or 90 days. Uh, Maybe it'll even cover you for a year. But now what are you going to do? You're going to see your financial house fall apart. There's really only three choices when you get hit with a cash flow crunch. It's eat into your assets, go into debt. Now, it's not so easy going into more debt other than credit card debt uh, if you can't qualify for a mortgage or a mortgage refinance, or adjust your lifestyle. So when I give a client a choice, you want to adjust your lifestyle, you want to go into debt, or you want to eat your assets, I don't like any of those choices. So having the proper disability in place makes sense. But now, what if that individual from that same disability died, right? Does his partner, his spouse want to be involved in that business? Yes or no? Do they have the wherewithal to handle it from an administrative standpoint? Yes or no? Is there adequate life insurance in force so that they can replace the income that the decedent lost, or or perhaps even sell out of that property because they know they don't have the ability to manage it, but they can carry it for extra months because they had the right amount of term insurance in place. Um, so those are things to look at. Also, and I didn't mention this in the intro about the professional relationships. We have third parties looking at the property and casualty coverage of our clients, and whether that's from a personal standpoint or whether that's from a business standpoint, so such that and again, we've got practitioners in this audience. What's the hurricane deductible on the property? And will the client be able to afford that if Sandy comes through and rips the roof off and causes all kinds of internal damage to the property? So, working in conjunction with either with their property and casualty agent or introducing them to one in our professional network, we would address those things. Again, it's up to the client to make these decisions, but it's up to us to bring them our concerns, but also show them the opportunities. So it's all of these basic, what I would call tackling and blocking, to use an analogy with football, all these basic things that need to be done properly, because if not done properly and the right circumstances roll up, it's going to put your client in a very awkward position, and something that they thought they would make money in the long term becomes a headache. Also, I would think before going into any kind of agreement, making sure you have a good real estate attorney on hand to look over or to draft any lease paperwork that needs to be done with the tenant, doing credit checks on the tenant. Uh, these are all important issues. So these are all things that should be done prior to. And again, we even have professional relationships in the construction business because we're helping our elderly clients not oftentimes, but sometimes doing retrofits on their homes to accommodate areas of concern from the standpoints of the ability to do activities of daily living on a safe basis. So, oftentimes people look at projects and say, oh, gee, part of what I'm going to have to finance or to fund is renovations on this investment property. I'd be pretty darn sure that you've got an accurate assessment of what it's going to cost you before you get into something that you're going to be in for a long period of time, and that has high relative transaction costs involved if you want to get out. So those are some of the basic things. I'm sure I'm missing some, but I'd really think long and hard on behalf of the client before they just, you know, you can make a little bit of money on a real estate and think you're a real estate investor, but realize you're competing with professionals that are doing this every day. So you better have your ducks in order.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the part you mentioned about cash is particularly important because the pandemic has taught all of us to plan for the unexpected. And we've seen, local laws be very tenant friendly as far as not forcing tenants to pay. There has been not so much as far as legal benefits for the landlords who also have bills to pay as well. It's been very tenant focused, at least from what I've seen, as far as allowing, people to defer rent or just not pay it at all. And there's nothing really that the landlord can do. So that the pandemic has really taught us that. And I think another important thing that you mentioned is that with real estate, you have to be prepared for things that you can't really predict, not just with pandemic and cash flow, but problems with the property. I've had a lot of, knocks on the chin with my own real estate. I still don't regret doing any of it. It's still, long term, I think really going to pay off for me in my own side hustle of real estate. But having extra cash on hand for each investment to make sure that during leaner times you're able to accommodate and to be honest, even just personally keeping extra cash on hand, maybe not specifically tied to those properties, has been really important. I mean, I've been sued over a property line that I inherited from a prior owner 6 months after I bought a property. I'm defending a lawsuit that cost me $15,000 unexpectedly on just the two-foot stretch of the property line. I've had a roof blow off, like you mentioned. It wasn't a hurricane, but it was just a really windy day. So I had an insurance, an insurance deductible that I had to pay, which was, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000. There's, water problems that, water heater blew and water was going all over the place and, couldn't fix it for a day and it caused some problems. So there's always things that will come up. And I think having cash on hand is so critical, specifically for investors. I think it's also critical for owner occupants, but even more so for when you're doing this as an investment, it's really important to have that extra cash on hand. So as far as diversification, because real estate is really one type of investment, there are a lot of others out there. But why is it that diversification is so important so that you don't put all of your eggs in a real estate basket? Because I see a lot of people doing that because real estate it's sexy, it's interesting, it's fun. People love to look at listings and dream of living in a place or renting it out or whatever. But sometimes that professional network will bring people back to earth and explain to them why it's so important to have other investments as well. But I want to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, well, we're advocates of multi-asset class portfolios. So again, it's stocks, it's bonds, it's cash, it's alternative investments. I would put real estate in the alternative investment category. That alternative investment category might comprise anywhere between 5 and 20%. Again, for all the same concerns that I mentioned earlier, having too much money there in real estate as a percentage of your overall investment portfolio can be problematic. I had a client, and he wasn't over-invested in it, but it was a large sum. He was disabled. He was collecting a very sizable $24,000 a month income tax-free between Social Security, his Goldman Sachs long-term disability, and his individual disability. He had lent a restaurant owner over $1 million against a restaurant that he owned. And he was getting a hefty 10% rate of return, but the liquidity dried up. The man wasn't able to pay back the loan in time. The client was happy to extend that. But again, fortunately for him, and he was disabled before he made this investment, but if for whatever reason the insurance companies came back and challenged that disability, and he wasn't getting $24,000 a year and needed the principal, not just the interest on $1 million, but the principal on $1 million to meet his needs, he wouldn't have had it. So by being diversified into other asset classes, there's where it could take months to sell and provide liquidity out of an investment piece of real estate, we could sell we could liquidate your cash and get it to you today. I can wire transfer it to you, right? If we're selling stocks and bonds, the day after they clear or the day they clear, we can move the money to you. So there's a big difference in the terms of liquidity for investment real estate and marketable securities. So we'd be an advocate of again, having the right cash on hand, having other investments to prepare for it. When you look at long-term rates of return, not over short periods of time, but where we would expect long-term rates of return on real estate to be, mid to double digits, you could expect over the long term for stocks to outperform that. So, but not over the short term. You generally are going to see a lot less volatility in the real estate market in the short term than you are going to see with stocks and to a lesser degree bonds. So again, knowing the client's situation, knowing their current cash flow needs, and anticipating future needs under any scenario helps the advisor position a portfolio properly to address all potential outcomes. I'm sorry, Mark, are you still on mute?
Yeah, I was, sorry.
I didn't catch you. I see your lips.
This is my first series, so we're learning on the fly here. Okay. Rookie mistake. But we all make it, right? I actually saw somebody hold up a mug during a Zoom session that actually had printed on it said you're muted. pretty handy tool. I got to get one of those.
Time on Zoom.
Yes, exactly. But you touched on something that's interesting as far as the long-term nature of real estate and what, unless you're in the process of like in the game of flipping properties, which is high risk, potentially high return, but also you could end up flat on your back. But just looking at real estate from a longer term play and looking at, one of the reasons that I'm inspired by real estate is because of what my grandfather did. Probably he bought a couple properties probably 75 years ago that are still in the family. He passed away 30 years ago, but it's still creating a legacy for him, in helping my extended family, support themselves to a certain degree. But I think it's also important that you kind of have to plan for that. I don't think he necessarily planned that to be the case, but real estate can be a really great long-term play as far as providing, income into retirement and things like that. So I want to get your take on real estate almost as an alternative or additional means of providing cash flow during retirement age, and then also succession planning for transferring that real estate. And again, why that's so important to have trusted estate attorneys involved in your overall team is to help plan for those things. So maybe let's talk about the really long-term play here with real estate.
Well, it's a great investment, and it's inflation protected in a way, right? Because you're going to have tenants, and the tenants are going to expect to have to pay more. Where we don't advocate any consumer debt, right? There's times when it's necessary, but I said this in the last program. It's the anchor around your neck that you drag through life. I mean, it's usury, the fees and the interest rates that are charged by these banks. But that being said, with real estate, it's a collateralized loan. We're darn near, and you can speak to this, Mark, but we're darn near the lows in interest rates. I would expect an investor today to be able to make a healthy profit over the cost of borrowing by going into debt to finance an investment piece of property. So I think it can play a role because over time, you'll be paying down the mortgage. In the meantime, your cash flow will be going up. Depending upon your tax situation, there's tax credits available. Again, it's a very dependable, source of income for a retiree, and it's a diversification away from the cash flow that they would get off of their stocks or off of their bonds. So we feel it could be a very good complement to marketable securities within a client's portfolio.
Yeah, I think complement is the key there because it probably shouldn't be the only plan you have for retirement. I have seen people do that, some of which successfully, but the diversification is definitely important. One thing that I don't think gets a lot of attention is also the aspect of inflation as it relates to real estate. So if you look at if you take out, let's say, a 30-year fixed mortgage, and let's say it's now, you're right, interest rates are near the lowest that they have ever been. And let's say you take out a 30-year fixed mortgage today, right? And it costs you $3,000 a month, for example, that payment stays fixed no matter what happens with inflation over the entire 30-year duration of the loan. But one thing that I love about real estate is that inflation doesn't necessarily affect your expenses. Maybe it'll affect the cost of your insurance or the taxes to a certain degree, depending on where you live. There's different tax situations in different states where the taxes may stay the same or they may go up over time. But inflation is a really powerful tool because it's not a tool, but an aspect of real estate, because if you look at that same property, 15 years ago that is now collecting, let's say, $2,000 a month in rent, they were probably only collecting $1,000 a month of rent at that time, or maybe less, who knows? So the nice thing about real estate is that if you set in your mortgage early on and you hold that real estate for a long time, in all likelihood, not only will the rents go up, but the property value will likely go up in a meaningful way over a long period of time as well. Historically speaking, obviously, there's going to be ups and downs, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the inflationary side of this to where you're actually benefiting from fixing in your expense, your major expense, which is usually the mortgage, but you're growing that asset and you're potentially collecting more and more rent over time just because of inflation. Just things get more expensive over time.
I don't know that I could add anything to that, Mark. I think you did a good job of summarizing it, right? Dollars that you're going to use to repay that loan 15 years down the road, right? If it's a 5% inflation over 15 years, you're going to be the equivalent of paying that mortgage at half the outlay, right? So that's good. But in the meantime, that's one of the larger expense items in the P&L on the real estate. The revenue, though, is going to go up. So depending upon what you've done in terms of improvements, the tenant, that's going to be positive. So there's going to, over time, the inflation adjusted spread between your revenue and your expenses should widen, making it more profitable for you the longer you hold it. And it gives you a lot more flexibility when you get to retirement in terms of what to do with that property, whether you want to sell it, whether you want to finance it, whether you want to move into it. There's choices. And having a client in a position that they have choices is a good thing. And that's why, again, stressing the multi-asset class portfolio, because you just look back, you can say, well, gee, this has been a good year for real estate, right? A lot of clients moved to the suburbs, right? So pricing went up in the suburbs, but for a short period of time, pricing took a hit in the city. So, that's why I think over the short term, you have to be adequately financed and prepared. Over the long term, I think clients will benefit from investment real estate.
Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely a longer term prospect for real estate. It just makes more sense to me that if you hold this property long enough, again, your rents will hopefully increase over time. The value of the property will increase. You also have the control over any renovations that you want to do to improve the property, which can also affect the value. It's a little bit different than when you're investing in stocks or bonds, where, let's take stocks for an example. You can't directly, unless you own a very large share of the company, you can't directly impact their performance, right? You can do your research and hope that the company does well and that the market takes well to it and that the stock value goes up, but you don't necessarily have direct control over that like you might with real estate, where you can, put money into it. And I've yet to find anyone that I've spoken to who owns a property still that they bought 20 years ago that doesn't say, oh my God, I can't believe how much more it's worth now, and that they don't regret keeping it long term. So I think the long-term nature of real estate is where the real value is, if you can just ride out the bumps in between, and there definitely are plenty of them along the way. that you want to be prepared for and diversified for and make sure you have the cash for. But the long game, in my opinion, is where you really win in real estate. There are people that are very successful with flipping. For me, that's not the angle. I don't have the time. Like, that's a huge time commitment for people to be going through massive renovations and whatnot. But the long game is where I think people can really benefit, and also to a certain degree, not always, because the pandemic has taught us otherwise, but you can mitigate risk by just holding it. If you just sit on it long enough, eventually your tenants will pay off your mortgage for you over a long period of time. But that's my personal take. I'm not a flipper, even though I've done a couple of flips. It's more of a long game for me.
Right. I think, after our last conversation, Mark, thinking about this as a side hustle, I think as CFP professionals and other professionals that might be on this call, as well as investors, you really have to go into these things with your eyes wide open. I mean, it can be great and it can be a nightmare. I mean, you could be getting a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, my toilet's backed up. You better have a plan in place to deal with it, right? So,
or a property manager,
yeah,
even
or
better.
a property manager.
I'm a big proponent
and
of
that's
that.
all part of having the right professional network. So if there's one thing that I could get across to the viewers today, it's really doing your homework up front on it and making sure you have a good team. And that team should be spoken to prior to entering into any transactions. We both mentioned, things that can go wrong. There's a lot that can go right. And that's what people see. They hear the stories from others, but along the way, there's been a lot of struggles. The better the investor can understand those struggles and have a plan in place or professionals in place to help them deal with it, the more satisfied they're going to be about the investment they make.
Absolutely. And I think television has played into that, because you used to have these TV shows. They're not so much on TV anymore, but the HGTV shows about, flipping houses, which showed people that have never done it before, who basically quit their day job, bought a condo and went in there with a jackhammer or a sledgehammer on their own and started knocking out walls and putting in cabinets, and it made it appear so easy. But there were so many aspects of that they didn't discuss on those shows, like financing. These people didn't have enough cash to buy these places without a mortgage. So what financing were they getting? Were they getting construction financing to do the work? And they oversimplified it. So I think it kind of glorified real estate to a certain degree. Real estate can be a grind in some cases, and I think TV has oversimplified that a little bit. Not to bash on TV, because I used to love those shows myself, to be honest. But you can, if you're a professional in that world, you can kind of see what they're not talking about.
I watch them too, and I'll just share a story. I recently did a renovation on my kitchen, and the framing work was held up for about 3 weeks because the inspector said he couldn't get back, and all it was putting in a couple of pieces of blocking, and all of a sudden it cost me 3 weeks. Now I lived in the home while it was going on. I had another kitchen to use along the way, but that time costs money. And then if you lose your subcontractors along the way because they were planning on things being done and not done, again, it comes back to being properly financed, that you can handle those extra loan payments while no one's paying you while that work's being done. Things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why for me personally, I'm not in the flip game. It's higher risk, and you have those expenses that you can't necessarily predict, and delays are very common. So one of the sessions that we've done was with real estate agents who are also investors themselves, and they always say, like, we have 3 models. We have the best case scenario, the likely scenario, and the worst case scenario. We base all of our decisions early on before we sometimes even go see the property on the worst case scenario. And if it still looks good, then they know it's the right type of investment. So I think finding the right property and the right investment requires a lot of upfront work to make sure that you're doing that properly. So I want to shift the conversation to down payment. So a lot of clients wonder, if they have, let's say they have significant excess cash that they could put a down payment on or use for a down payment. how do you decide how much to put down? And I think leverage is an important factor here, but from a tax perspective and also from a cash flow perspective. But let's say a client comes to you and they say, I have $1 million I can figure out what I want to do with, and I'm buying $1 million property. How would you go about recommending what down payment would be appropriate? Assuming, let's just say the lender requires 30% down, just as an example.
That individual is in an enviable position that they have the cash that they could
Yes.
swing into an investment piece. But that being said, Mark, in all seriousness, have they addressed all of those items that I brought up as concerns initially, right? Because if they have $1 million,
Let's assume yes.
they could have a will in place, right? They could have some term insurance in place. They could have the right property and casualty insurance in place. All right, so let's assume that that was all done. Look at where interest rates are right now. Why would you want to put money into a piece of real estate when you could have that money sitting on the side? Think of those unfortunate folks that had investment real estate that was 100% paid off when Sandy hit, right? Now they need cash to do renovations, to bring that place back up to snuff from where it was before it hit. Where are they getting the cash? You tell me, you're a lender, right? Are you going to lend against a property that's uninhabitable? Probably not.
Nope.
Okay. So
not without a construction loan, no.
Right. So having those liquid resources available makes sense. And when you look at the app, and again, this is where I bring in the accounting team, you look at the after-tax cost of the mortgage versus what they could be doing in a multi-asset class portfolio with a moderate objective, they're going to be ahead of the game, financially speaking.
Yeah.
And if there was a reason, which I really can't think of, that they'd want to pay off the loan, they can take the liquidity out of the investments and use it to pay down the loan. But granted, they're going to have some risk on the investments, but they also have some risk on the resale value of the real estate. So I wouldn't be overfunding it, but I would be looking to get them under the level where primary mortgage insurance would be required. So I'm not a big
and that
advocate of putting
typically
a lot of
doesn't
money
even.
down. It's tying up that cash.
Yeah, you're right. It ties up the cash. It does sort of tie your hands as far as being able to absorb some of those bumps that are common with investment real estate. But I think the important thing that you said there, or one of the important things, is just the power of leverage. To be able to borrow money at, let's say, 3 or 4%, because interest rates are a little higher for investment properties than they are for a primary mortgage. So let's say you're even borrowing at 4%, the interest that you pay on that is tax deductible against the income. So when you factor in those tax benefits, it's probably a net of maybe closer to 3%, let's just say, to keep it simple. But if you can invest that money over time at, let's say 5% or whatever it is over a longer period of time with the type of portfolio that you mentioned, you're actually gaining net worth because you're borrowing money, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's a way to be able to put both the asset side of your balance sheet to work for you, right? Because you're investing that money that you leave left over, but you're also using debt as a means of gaining income. I almost look at it as like playing with the house's money, right? If you're at a casino, which please don't take this as advice to go to the casino, but if the casino is giving you money to play with and you're playing with it and you're going to win over time, which is why I tell you not to go to the casino, because you likely won't, but you're using their money to be able to benefit yourself financially over time. And I think that's a really powerful thing, especially as you compound that over time. So I want to share this analysis that you and I did before the call, because I think it's very relevant to put this into context. And so just for the audience's sake, to explain what Mark and I did, is we compared if you have a, assumed mortgage rate of 4%, right? Because interest rates are a little bit higher on investment properties. So let's just assume 4%. And that you do a compounding interest gain on your investments of 5% over time. Compounding mean, for those of you who don't understand that concept, is that the money gets reinvested every month or every year or whatever it is. So you're gaining on your gains over time. And we did an analysis both at a financing $500,000 as well as $2 million. And this applies to those real estate agents who are on the call today who see clients come in and want to buy properties in cash, whether it be primary residences or investment properties, whatever it may be. They're not using leverage as part of their overall approach. And I've seen it on my end where people turn a nose up to us in the lending industry where say, well, I'm an all-cash buyer. And they wear it almost as a badge of honor, which, is somewhat understandable, I guess, because they have gotten to a certain place financially in their world. But we looked at how much it actually costs them over time. And those people that think they're making the greatest decision ever are actually probably making one of the dumbest decisions they can possibly make. Not to call them dumb, but we wanted to highlight some of these numbers for the audience so that they can see what it actually turns into over time. So if we're looking at $500,000 loan, let's use somebody in that example that we gave, maybe they're buying $1 million property. They could either buy in cash or they could finance half of it, let's just say. So we looked at it over 10, 20, and 30 years. And over 10 years, the difference between if you were to leverage that money, the $500,000, and keep $500,000 invested over time, the client would gain over the first 10 years $134,000 in extra income or revenue from the investments, less what it costs them to borrow. So that's already factoring in the amount that it costs in interest over that period of time. When you do that over 20 years, you're compounding over 20 years and you're taking the mortgage payments and interest over 20 years, that $500,000 has now doubled itself. You now have a net gain beyond covering your interest expense of $518,000. Put that over 30 years, you're talking about $1.9 million just because you took leverage rather than taking money out of investments. And when you look at that on, let's say, a $2 million purchase, which hopefully no investor is buying a property for $2 million in cash, unless they're doing a 1031 exchange and can't qualify for financing. Let's just say it is someone who could get a mortgage if they choose to. Those same numbers using 4% assumed mortgage rate and a 5% rate of return on compounding investments over the first 10 years, net gain of $530,000. You look at over 20 years, it's a net gain of $2.1 million. If you look at it over 30 years, it's $8 million. The value you add by compounding interest over time compared to interest that actually over the course of the loan goes down because you're paying your mortgage balance down. So the interest that is part of your monthly payment is actually less and less and less, which is why you see these numbers go up over time where it's, you compare 10, 20, and 30 years, the net gain over the longer period of time is so much greater than the first 10 years. That's why. But those numbers are very compelling. I mean, so you get a buyer who walks into a property, and again, there are a lot of real estate agents on this call who wants to buy a property for $2 million, all cash. You can tell them over the next 30 years, if you keep this property that long, which a lot of people don't, but let's just say they did, you would actually quadruple that money by investing it instead of putting it in all cash. So I think those are really compelling numbers that we put together, Mark, and we'd love to get your comments on that as well.
Well, that's just the case over the long term. And, when you think about it from the investor standpoint, and just looking back at the market over the last year, or a multi-asset class portfolio that was up substantially. Well, it's up substantially on a calendar year basis, but during time periods throughout the year, particularly when COVID just hit, most multi-asset class portfolios that would have an expected rate of return of 5% were down over the first quarter. So what I would say to the real estate investor is let's put some of the money into a multi-asset class portfolio. And if there's a personal concern about wanting to keep debt outstanding, and again, after the consultation with your tax advisor, if you want to segregate money out at one point to be able to pay that loan down at any time, regardless of where the market is, you could look at exit points along the way and take some money out of the investments. And that ties into a couple of the questions that we have, Mark, that I see up that I'll just address in the last couple of minutes. Lowell was asking about the ability and much easier to enter a game with 20% down on a mortgage versus 100% down on a stock investment. That's true, but it is easier, but you're going to want to, you don't have to put 100% of your liquidity into the stock market or a multi-asset class portfolio either. But when you do put the 20% into the mortgage, it's tied up, right? So we don't want to tie up too much, particularly if all those other concerns aren't addressed. And another individual asked about converting a retirement account to be able to purchase real estate. How does that work and what costs are associated with it? I think most of the professionals out there will know that if you're younger than 59 and a half, with the exception of some exceptions, you're going to pay, or it's going to be accountable for as ordinary income taxes and a penalty. So for, generally speaking, people that are making real estate investments that have that kind of money are in higher tax brackets. When you add the income taxation and the penalties, you could be close to 50%. So Jennifer, if you're taking, you know, $200,000 out of your retirement account, by the time you finish with the transaction costs, you might be down to $100,000. That's a big deficit to make up for. I don't think I'd be advocating that, but I might suggest that rather than funding your 401k, you may want to use that money, pay the taxes up front on the smaller portion to build up the nest egg necessary to move into real estate.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well, Mark, because I know that there are real estate investment vehicles where you can do, like, for example, a self-directed IRA, where you can actually purchase real estate within your IRA. There are some challenges with that, and I've heard that they recently came out with some things where you can do it in a 401k as well. There are some restrictions on that. Basically, whatever gains you get have to go directly back into the IRA. So you can't take the benefit yourself. So it's basically like running a business through your IRA. So any expenses or benefits have to be paid through the IRA, which creates some complications. Financing those is also very difficult. There are, I think, only maybe one or two lenders out there in the country, we're not one of them, that does that type of financing. And the rates are definitely high. The reason that lenders don't like to do that is because the IRA has to own the real estate. It's not you individually. It has to be the IRA entity. So it's not a real human being. Very difficult to foreclose on an IRA as opposed to a person, right? So financing those are very difficult, but there are vehicles out there. And I have seen some people that have dabbled in that, including some of the panelists that we had on the real estate agent panel a week or so ago. And so Jennifer, nice to see you, by the way. But if you want more information about that, I can definitely get you in touch with some people that have done it. And they've actually passed along, just from my own knowledge, because I'm learning on the fly too, like everyone else. I now have some names of some of those lenders that do that type of financing, but it's very limited from what I understand. The rates are definitely higher, but it is a potential option to kind of invest through your IRA or potentially 401k in real estate in particular. But again, you want to make sure that that portfolio is also diversified as well, and that you're not using all of your IRA money and putting that into real estate, because that is dangerous, because as you're getting older, you're going to need, you stop working, you need that IRA money to be coming in. And if your real estate isn't producing, that's a scary endeavor when you stop working and you don't have inflow of cash. So it can be risky. Definitely don't want to use your whole portfolio for that, I would assume. Not to put words in your mouth, Mark, but I can pretty much assume that's what you're going to say. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. So I think we're just about out of time here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Mark. You've provided amazingly valuable insight into how to make sure that people are prepared for this type of investment. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for people that get overly emotional about real estate. I think it's really important to make sure you have that team. That's a consistent theme we have had through pretty much every session that we've had. And the reason that we're having different professionals join the session from all aspects of real estate. That was really the purpose, is to show people this is not just an emotional decision you want to make because you see a property that looks really cool. That's where you can get yourself into trouble with real estate, is on the emotional side. And when you're doing it for investment purposes, it's really about the numbers. You don't have to buy in the neighborhood that you want to live in. You don't have to buy in the city that you want to live in. We talked about that in another session about, potentially investing in other cities that may be either less expensive or have higher rates of return or whatever it may be. You don't have to buy in your own neighborhood. And just exploring all these things of how you can create the team around you is so, so valuable. So, and Mark, you've been a great proponent of that, and also, one of the people in my own network that I feel very much comfortable relying on for that type of advice, and making sure that people make the right financial decisions and don't jump into this when they're not ready. And all those things you mentioned really very, very helpful in giving people context as to when their clients or them individually may be ready to do this, and not go into it with blinders on. So I really, really appreciate your time and expertise, and look forward to continuing to collaborate together. So thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. You're welcome.
Yeah. So I'm going to reshare my screen here just to talk about a couple more logistics. So we have these additional sessions coming up, as you know, next Wednesday, same time, same place. Again, for any of you who are having any difficulty with the links, please email us at mmteam@freedommortgage.com. We'll get you the website where you can view all of those sessions. I think I actually put it in the chat. So if you want to check that before you log off, by all means do that. You can get links to the prior sessions if you want to share them with anyone who may be interested in that particular topic. Any clients who want to join us for the additional sessions and check out the prior sessions will be able to do that as well. So please definitely check that out. These are the sessions we have coming up over the next 4 weeks. Again, thank you to Mark Salerno for joining me today. All of his contact information is here. If you have any questions, I'm sure I'm going to put words in your mouth, Mark, which I'm getting very good at. I'm sure he would love to speak with you if you have questions, or if you have clients who you would like to get this type of analysis done for, to make sure that they're ready. And I think as professionals, we all have that responsibility to not push people into it for our own benefit, obviously, and that's not what we're all here to do. But I think Mark can be a great resource for you and your clients, and anyone that you know who's looking to make sure that this is the right move for them. So thank you again, Mark. In just a minute here, we are going to wrap up. I will leave up the slide at the very end here. So for those of you who are joining through the Financial Planning Association and looking for your CE credits, it'll have the website and the special code that you'll need to go to claim that credit. So again, Mark, thank you so much. Thank you all to all of you who have joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.